This is Bruno, and this is the LARVOL Friends weekly podcast where we talk with friends of the LARVOL group about various topics, about healthcare, about other topics of leadership and business. Today we're going to talk with Bob Prachar, who I will introduce in a minute. And LARVOL is a SaaS company based in San Francisco, but really headquartered in the metaverse. So all of our associates are all over the world. We don't have an office. Our office actually now is a metaverse because for about a year, all of our interactions as a management team, as an executive team, has been in our virtual office. Maybe we'll talk with Bob about leadership without physical proximity. He has a lot of experience in leadership and probably some very interesting perspective on that topic. So I know Bob for quite a few years. We started our career together in New York City at IBM Global Services, a consulting firm that was acquired by IBM very shortly thereafter. So welcome to the podcast, Bob.
Good morning, Bruno. It's great to be here.
Well, it's wonderful to have you. And what I wanted to start with, perhaps, is to have maybe a more detailed introduction of your career and the very interesting and successful path you had as a general manager in the healthcare industry, and then sharing your learnings and your expertise in leadership and management in your new business endeavors as well. So, can you walk us through your career in corporate America and then as an entrepreneur as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I started my career in what you would call big pharma, and that was with Merck. And I have to be honest, it was kind of it really wasn't very well thought out. When I graduated from undergrad with a finance and economics degree, I decided I wanted to apply that in a business that made a product, as opposed to, a services business, say banking or Wall Street or whatnot. And I did my own robust search and mailed out, in the day you would mail out resumes and cover letters. I mailed it to 100 companies in the United States. It was, they were considered the top 100 companies at that time. And I ended up with an opportunity at Merck and at Exxon. And this is kind of a little bit of a foreshadowing of maybe we'll take the conversation. But at the time, Exxon was in the midst of a tanker crisis where one of their ships crashed into Alaska. And I said, how could you go wrong with the pharmaceutical industry and their stellar reputation? And so that's really how I made my choice. And, flash forward into my career, I started out as a cost accountant. Not very glamorous, but a great way to learn the nuts and bolts of the business. I then went back for an MBA at the Wharton School. After that, you and I met when I joined the boutique consulting firm working in the strategy space. What a great experience. Also a great roommate in New York and you, Bruno. You learn a lot about a lot of things as a strategy consultant, and you learn how to be comfortable being uncomfortable in those situations because you need to move quick and deliver value. Then I decided to transition back into industry and become a general manager. I started as a senior product manager at Abbott Laboratories, working in their HIV business. So I was really fortunate. I had opportunities over and over again to work on life-altering businesses. When I was at Abbott, the scientific community in pharma had just invented the triple cocktail for HIV, and as many that can remember back that far will appreciate, it was a life-altering, the difference between life and death type of therapeutic regimen. So I was a part of that. Moved on to J&J and became a part of the TNF inhibitors, autoimmune drugs, biologics that transform the world, in areas like psoriasis, rheumatoid arthritis, Crohn's disease, many, many autoimmune diseases, brand names like Remicade, which was my product that I managed globally in rheumatology, Enbrel, Humira, and there's a whole host of others that are now on the market. Then, like many in my career, I got to a point where I was leading a lot of people, and I decided that what I really wanted to do is build companies from the bottom up. I, went out into the venture capital space, worked for an autism-based company, helped take a company public, and that's where I became a chief strategy officer, chief commercial leader, and got very close, about 6 months away from being a CEO of a publicly traded company. And that's where I kind of decided that my purpose had shifted and I left the industry. So we can talk more about that if that's, part of your interest today.
Well, thank you for summarizing your journey. We have, by the way, today with us as well our producer, Daniel Jaramillo, who at some point is going to probably jump in with a question. Mark Grambling is also listening in on the line and might also jump in with a question or two. So I have actually a non-leadership, I guess leadership-related question. When you had to pick between Exxon and Merck early in your career, it's interesting because the oil and gas industry, the pharma industry are, of course, big standard industry in corporate America. They both have a complex reputation, despite the value they bring, especially, I have a bias, the pharma industry. Why is it? Why is it that the pharma industry, in your opinion, find a way to be nearly as unpopular as the tobacco industry, despite all of the incredible value that it provides to society?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a huge question, Bruno, and it is part of, the thought process I had leaning into today. Remember, back in that day, the pharma industry was relatively untarnished. And at that time, Merck, as an example, was the most admired company, and I guess it's the Fortune most admired company list for 5 years running at that point in time. So to me, as a young employee, I was like, there is no better opportunity, right, to go into a pristine industry and learn the way to do things right. I would have never anticipated that things like Vioxx and others, other products gone bad, would have occurred in the industry. I think where you can get it wrong, right, just like any expert, is you can get caught up in your own mantra to the point where you're not seeing things objectively. And I think that's where pharma has its catch-22. I mean, inventing life-altering drugs is an incredibly virtuous pursuit, right? But when you get so caught up in your success and you're building a narrative that works for you to explain why things have to be the way they've always been, as opposed to saying, how has the world shifted? What do I need to do differently? I think that's where all companies can get themselves in trouble. And I think that's where pharma at times has gone wrong, is they believe their own narrative to the extent where they're unwilling to listen with what the rest of the world is telling them they have to do. And I think the classic example in today's times is the opioid crisis. And I worked for a company that made an opioid product. I spent very little time on that business as a chief strategy officer. It was kind of running itself. And now I look back and I say, what could I have done differently to ask the more probing questions of why were our sales so incredibly high in a place like West Virginia, where it certainly doesn't have the population to justify high sales if opioids are only being used for extreme pain?
When I'm listening to you, I'm thinking, I don't know if you've heard that expression, after 40 years, you've got the face you deserve, your face, your head. And maybe it's the same with an industry. After 40 years, you've got the reputation you deserve. So maybe it's the accumulation of little decisions that the industry took, that members of the industry took, that cultural aspect as well, that we collectively missed. And now we have, as an industry, and I consider myself part of the pharma industry. LARVOL is serving and supporting the pharma industry. But we have, as an industry, a responsibility. We're responsible for our reputation. in some ways, right? And our reputation objectively is not that great, as much as I'm sorry to admit it. And you're right. When I started my career as well, I looked at the pharma industry, especially the biotech industry, as absolutely a force for good, absolutely. And now many people are not so sure, right? So it's tragic in a way, but it's a reality of the perception. Uh, we deserve it, and we have to think, okay, how do we one little decision at a time, one culture at a time, how do we establish a more positive image for the industry? And so I hope that happens, because I'm a big believer, of course, that this industry is essential. And what we saw with COVID, I would say, in some ways was a good step, because I think that although maybe the industry didn't get full credit, perhaps, but certainly objectively had a big impact in quickly finding vaccines, relatively quickly finding vaccines for the world. So hopefully that's going to help a little bit.
Well, I'm an optimist, Bruno, and I base my optimism on some facts, right? And you and I both know that one of the leader of the Pfizer vaccine business was also with us at IBM. And I know Nanette to be an incredible person. So, in the end, it boils down to people, right? And so I have belief. I think there's some small things that the industry can do. Well, not small to them, but signals that they can take immediately. For example, I wish the industry would not fight this proposed change in, Medicare regulation that the Biden administration has put forward, right? I mean, we've been debating and lobbying against Medicare price intervention since I started in the industry. And it's just, it's come to a point where the government should be able to control certain drugs with certain pricing. I think that's something that they should just accept. In the long term, I think what it boils down to is leaders being really clear on what their values are, not allowing Wall Street to cloud their vision by, driving towards results at whatever cost, and living through the values that I would believe 95% of people that join the pharmaceutical industry espouse to have, right? Which is to create life-altering medicines, to save patients' lives, transform their lives. It's when you allow economics to creep in and distort your thinking a little bit over time, and then you start believing your own messages. That's where you get yourself in trouble, and that's true in any industry, and we're certainly seeing it in some of the massive social media players right now.
Maybe at the end of the day, culture and yes, the culture of short-term profit, for example, is to blame. And as you and I know, culture is extremely hard to change in a company, and even more in an industry. So it's a bit like a huge boat, and you have to change direction. It takes a long time, and it's very hard as industry leaders and general managers like you were in this industry. It's very hard. So shifting gear a little bit for the second part of our podcast today, let's talk about leadership, but not at the level of necessarily the industry itself or big company, but sort of day-to-day leadership. And perhaps you could elaborate more on the following phase of your career as a strategist, as a coach, as well as building your own business. Tell us about that, and maybe tell us about general leadership and business learnings you had in your career that you think would be valuable for our audience today.
Sure. I lead a company that's, my own personal company called Springer Leadership. And the focus that I've evolved to is I was a previous chief strategy officer in a couple different large and small organizations. So I started in strategy, but where I've evolved the business is the place that I feel most passionate about and probably most effective, which is team cohesiveness, where I'll work with an executive or an executive team to build their cohesiveness with each other in service of higher performance. And, I really enjoy that because that's the intersection of strategy and people and execution. And, the model that I've really come to be passionate about, and I use it exclusively with all my clients, whether I'm coaching them in their life or as an executive, it's a value-based leadership model. Simply said, it means leading from a complete understanding of what you value as an individual in the world. So, for example, do you care about courage, strength, creativity, innovation? These are big words. Many executives, although they'll all say, "Of course, I have strong values, and I'm really committed to my values." But if you ask them a simple question, could you list out your top 5 values that you care about and give me an example of how you've lived those out in the past week? Very few could do that. So what I feel is really important is that we start with saying, why am I doing what I'm doing? For example, what that really is our purpose in a career. So if you ask me that question, my purpose is to help people accelerate and enjoy their success in life as they define it. So that's why I do what I do. And when I wake up every morning, I can really get myself excited about saying, I'm going to help people be more successful today in the way they want to do it. And they'll be more happy and they'll be socially conscious. So those are the types of things that drive my why. But in terms of values, they get very much more specific. A big value for me in leadership, and I believe for any leader, is humility, meaning, do I put others and what's right for the best interests of the team in front of mine, and trust that if I do that, I'll be taken care of as well. So, if I had to offer anything to a young person, it's to continue to be clear on what your values are and can you live them out each day in the company that you're working for. And then also re-examine, why am I doing what I'm doing? And if you can't look yourself in the mirror and feel good about both your why and how you're living out your values, then it's likely you're not in the right environment.
Do you think that the incredible 2 years we went through of COVID had an impact on how people define their success? Right. I like the way you said success in life, the way they define it, and both acceleration of that success and finding joy in that success. For your clients and companies and executive you're working with, how has this extraordinary situation perhaps changed their way of thinking about success?
Yeah, I mean, that's the great hope, isn't it? And I can tell you there's a number of clients that I work with in a life coaching scenario where they left the big job during COVID because it changed their mindset about everything. And they're now pursuing much more selfless type activities in the nonprofit space. And they've reclaimed their health and wellness in terms of, their exercise routine, their eating habits, the time they spend with their family. It's been transformational for a lot of people. So, that's my big hope, is that, humans, we tend to evolve very quickly and we forget the pain and suffering, which I guess is why, women have multiple children, right? As you forget the pain and you move on and you say, I want to have that next one, or whatever that struggle is in your life, you can forget it because that's how the brain copes and moves forward. I hope with COVID that we don't really cope in that way, and that we remember that it really is about the simple things, and that, money is an essential aspect of living. However, when it becomes the essential marker of success, it's very easy to lose your way and become so stressed because it never ends, right? The next level of car or house or property, you could continue to compete with yourself for your whole life. I think what things have done in COVID is it's reminded people to slow down and pursue the simple things. I would say roughly half, maybe 60% of my clients, I think, are going to stick with that mindset. Another 40% have allowed themselves to get right back where they left off, and they're back in the rat race. So, let's hope that the 60% start to have a disproportionate influence on the world, and we can all see our way clear to a life that is balanced, successful, and also, we do good things for the world.
At the end of the podcast, I'm going to ask you to give to our audience a takeaway, something that you want them to remember. They remember one thing from listening to the podcast. Before that, I want to see if Daniel or Mark, our producers in the background for this podcast, if they have any questions now or later on, feel free to jump in anytime with a question. We have 8 minutes left in the podcast, so jump in, any of you, if you'd like. And
hi, this is
jump
Mark.
in. Yep, go ahead, Mark. Yep.
Hi, everybody listening. Mark Ramling, Director of Oncology at LARVOL. And Bob, I really connected in a very strange way to your statement that you came out of undergrad and you decided, I'm going to go look for something that makes a product versus a service. And I connect to that too, because coming out of undergrad, I wasn't sure where to go. So I went and got a PhD. But it seems now starting a company and running your own company is very directional. You seem to really be driving at something. And there's people in various stages of their career listening today. Was that a gradual change to go from being very open and sort of expansive? Or did it change where you saw exactly where you wanted to pursue? I know it's a very philosophical question, but I really connected to what you said about coming out of undergrad and where you wanted to head. Maybe that's more of a statement than a question.
I think that's what young people should be asking themselves. And, I think my advice to young people is always, you don't have to get it right for your entire life in your first series of moves. It's just important to do something that feels right to you at the time. And, the magical thing about making a choice is new facts and new experiences come into play with every choice we make. And then it gives us more information to make the next choice. I like the metaphor of I'm a big backpacker, and I teach survival skills at universities and backpacking, and I'm an outward bound instructor now as well. And, you make that first choice to go left or go right on a given trail. And then you start to get more information and you refine your thinking and you evolve your plan. But if you stand there trying to understand how the whole day is going to play out and never go left or go right, you're still at the same spot and you haven't learned anything and you've wasted a lot of time. So I like the idea with young people is to understand why you think you're making a choice and then accept the implications of that choice and keep learning, getting new information. For me, over time, I resisted for years and years the notion that what I really am best at is helping people be successful. Because people told me, you've got the skills, the personality, the intellect to be a CEO. And so I kind of forced myself down that path. And when I got 6 months out from that opportunity, I realized it's not what I wanted. And, yeah, you can do all those things as a CEO, but being an advisor is a very unique and special thing. And it links with my identity as a coach and a professor. That is what I was meant to do. And I'm just glad I got to the point that I realized that at 47 and didn't keep forcing myself to take that CEO job, which was right around the corner. And I actually followed my heart, probably for the first time in my career.
Bob, when I'm listening to you and about your advice to young people looking and making decisions in their career, what I'm thinking about, I'm connecting that to what you said at the beginning, which is success and joy. And the idea of joy for me is is linked to this idea of an adventure, meaning we don't know which direction our career is going to take. And if we did, it would be pretty boring. So the idea that we have to make decisions along the way, they're forks at the road, and sometimes they're reversible, sometimes they're not reversible. But it's essentially a journey and an adventure, a personal adventure that is finite, by the way, but needs to be taken with joy. When listening to you and your own adventure and the decision you made, I really like the fact that you're looking at it as a way to create joy and growth and learning with other people along the way. And I think that as a teacher that you are as well, and a coach and an advisor, it's a great source of satisfaction, I'm sure.
Absolutely. I mean, it's it's not to suggest that everybody should be a coach, an advisor, and a teacher. What I'm suggesting is that if you continue to keep an open mind and listen to what the universe is telling you, meaning when you're feeling uncomfortable about a situation, and I can tell you, for the last decade of my career in healthcare, I felt like a slow burning disconnect. And I thought it was my problem. And so I just kept plowing forward. And what I realized, it was really the problem, which is I wasn't comfortable operating in the environments that I was in. And I needed to find a new operating environment that met my ambitions. And so that, that's, if you're looking for that one thing, I know we're almost out of time, that I would advise people is to constantly ask yourself, not what am I doing, or am I making enough money, or is it prestigious enough, or what do my friends or my parents say or my spouse say about what I'm doing. Ask yourself, why are you doing what you're doing? And if you can't really answer the why in a way that's satisfying to you and motivating to you, then you need to make a change. In my opinion, the why is everything. And we often avoid the why because we assume that we know it. But most people, it takes a little while to really connect with their why.
The other aspect of what you just said is that it needs to be you, right? It cannot be your parents, it cannot be your family, and it cannot be your friends. And that little voice in your head that sometimes says something is wrong or uncomfort itself is probably sometimes because there's a disconnect between what you really want and do you want it because of other people or because it really comes from inside. So that why I like you the way you said, it needs to come from inside. It cannot be for other people.
It's exactly right, Bruno. And, I really like, the philosophy that you can never be of service to the world if you don't love yourself first. And that's not meant to sound selfish. That's meant to say, if you can be kind and believe in your own self-worth, anything is possible for others. But if that's not there, life can be a real deception.
Bob, thank you very much for joining us today at LARVOL Friends. We'll make sure that the links to your coaching and strategic advisory business is posted as well. And I encourage everybody to follow you. And if they have an interest in what you do, to connect with you. So thank you very, very much, Bob. Appreciate your time today.
Well, I'm glad I could be useful, Bruno. And, I just like to help. So thank you for having me.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.